Hey, what's up YouTube? Goratha here yet again. My new build is been getting a lot of attention, and I figured I'd make a build guide for it. It has some complicated mechanics, so I will try to explain them in detail, so you guys can kind of understand how it works. This build began as an idea to abuse Sniper's Mark and Blazing Salvo interaction as much as possible. First, I want to talk about Sniper's Mark. Sniper's Mark is a curse that increases projectile damage, grants life and mana flash charges, and splits projectiles. All this can be scaled with curse effect or mark effect. The part we care about the most in this build is the splitting projectiles. Normally when a projectile interacts with Sniper's Mark, it splits off or shoots in random directions. However, with Blazing Salvo, it will create more projectiles still, but if there's only one target, they will not go in random directions, and instead, they will have the potential to overlap on the same target. Essentially, this just means we get more projectiles, which is pretty broken. Let's lead us to the next part of the build, cast on crit. So normally when you self-cast Blazing Salvo, it requires some aiming to maximize damage. If you use traps, mines, or trigger, however, it will auto-target, leading to a smoother playstyle. Casting crit itself is a pretty complicated mechanic, but basically it's a trigger gem that uses an attack that will trigger a spell on critical. In this case, we are using Tornado Shot to trigger and Blazing Salvo as our spell. Tornado Shot it also synergizes quite well with Sniper's Mark and the Deadeye Ascendancy, and both of them chain, leading to some really nice clear. I'm not going to go into too much detail into how cast and crit works mechanically, but you want to keep in mind certain CDR breakpoints, which require different amounts of attack speed. This works differently, however, for bow cast and crit versus something like Cyclone, which has a fixed attack speed rate, which you're aiming for. If you have Awaken cast and crit and are using a bow, it is almost impossible to have too much attack speed. Tornado Shot specifically has two separate hits normally, the initial projectile and the secondary projectile. Both of these can trigger cast and crit, effectively having the attack speed required, and the Deadeye's ricochet node can also proc it, but it is less reliable. This is, however, mostly noticeable whenever you are near a wall. This, along with how fast Tornado Shot travels, makes the clear feel really good. For a single target, we swap into Blast Rain. It just has a lot more projectiles hitting at different intervals to make use of the CDR breakpoint. This, however, is only really relevant on endgame bosses, as the build furnishes insane amounts of damage regardless of that. So I know you guys like to see gameplay footage before getting into the build. I wanted to show you guys a Minotaur map. This is the map I've been showcasing my other builds with, so I figured I would just show off this map real quick. This is a Monster Life Enfeeble Beyond, and a bunch of sextants and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and start mapping here. You guys can see how the character clears. So people actually really screws our damage, and it's 40% Monster Life on top of that. And it's also in a Beyond map, so you guys can kind of see how it looks in my juice. Like I said, the clear is way better than I ever expected it to be. I thought the single target would be insane on this character, but I never expected the clear to be this good. Definitely exceeded my expectations. I'm probably not going to be looting this map because I don't want to waste too much time. I'll go ahead and loot after the map. I might skip the exhibition as well. Yeah, this character is extremely tanky. We have a ton of evasion. We have pretty high res. We have suppression. We have armor. And we have insane amounts of life gain hit, like I said before. Life gain hit just makes it so we pretty much just never take damage. Or we were taking damage, but it just gets healed up immediately. That's a little crazier than I normally do. Normally I don't really roll maps very much because I just can't be bothered in SF hardcore. But this build can definitely do extremely juiced maps. I've done Delirium maps. I've done 80% Delirium maps at Beyond. It's just really high damage. Extremely good at killing monsters. The clear is basically just keep up life tap, zealotry, and right click. It's not very complicated. We use Tornado on single target, and we do swap to Blast Rain for single target as well. The Enfeeble is lowering our damage quite a bit. And it supports the Monster Life on top of that. You kind of see how crazy the damage is. Even considering all that, we're still murdering the bosses. Now let's talk about some of the gear. I'm not going to go over every piece of gear, but I will go over the important parts for this character. So we're using a +1/+2 bow with Deafening of Woe essence crafted on it. And then we have double damage and attack speed. This part is actually not that hard to craft. You basically use Essence of Woe, and you can spam it until you get +1, or you can do only get Essence of Woe prefix, and then do can I roll attack, block the suffixes, and slam and exalt, and it'll guarantee the +1. And after that, you can clear the suffixes and multi-mod double damage and +2. This is just the best bow to use if you have Awaken Cast on Crit. The other option is you can use a Cast on Crit bow and normal Cast on Crit, but I think Awaken Cast on Crit actually is a higher top end than that. Next thing I want to talk about is the Asif's Chant. This is a pretty big item for this character. It helps a lot in synergy with the gloves, which I'll talk about in a second. But basically, we're using all our utility gems here, like Sniper's Mark, Flame Wall, Purifying Flame, and Cold Snap. I'll talk about that more when we talk about the gems, but this is very nice for triggering. It just makes the character feel a lot better as well. The other item I want to talk about, and the most important item for the character probably, is Leadership's Price. This item gives us conflux for the alt ailments, which is a pretty huge deal. So normally with the alt quality ailments, you get them from Secrets of Suffering or the Integration as well. This differs from Leadership though. Leadership has conflux, which means anytime you attack, you trigger the ailments. With the other two, you have to crit. And they're also based off the damage type you deal. So for example, lightning damage gives you sap, cold damage gives you brittle. That's not the case of Leadership's Price though. Your lightning damage can actually apply brittle, for example, or fire damage can apply brittle. And it applies all three of them. So we cap all our ailments out just by using fire damage. And the most important part is we don't have to crit. So our first attack can be a non-crit, and we can still apply brittle, which means our second attack will most likely be a crit, which is pretty important for casting crit. It'll just make the consistency of the build a lot smoother. And I do kind of want to talk about CDR. So like I mentioned before in the intro, we need some CDR for this character. The way you get the CDR cap normally is by having CDR on belt and CDR brute implicit, plus Awaken Cast on Crit is a decent amount as well. And I do want to talk about life gain hit with this character. So you can get life gain hit with the Shaper Ring, plus 14 life gain hit by spells with the Shaper Ring. And you can also get a Watcher's Eye with Vitality life gain hit, which affects all of your hits, including your attacks. This is very important for the sustain of the build. You're hitting hundreds of times per second, so it's just a lot of HP, like a lot of sustain. Very important part of the build. The last thing I want to talk about is the gloves. So like I said before, we're using Secrets of Suffering, or Leadership in this case. So you might be wondering how we're actually applying the gloves, which require Chill and Burning. The Burning actually comes from Flame Wall from the Asif's Chant, and the Chill comes from the Cold Snap in Asif's Chant. So normally you can't chill, shock, or freeze with Leadership, but Cold Snap chilling area still chills, which is kind of weird, but I don't know why that works that way. But basically, I guess the Cold Snap doesn't count as you doing it, but you still apply the chill, so you still get the damage bonus. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about with the gear, I think. I'll go over like the clusters and whatnot when I talk about the tree. So before we get into the tree, I quickly want to talk about how you level this character. So it should be pretty obvious, but you can't level as Cast on Crit. You'll have to level as something else. I would recommend leveling as Explosive Arrow, Tornado Shot, or Spectral Helix. These are probably the best skills to level as. This is kind of how your tree is going to look at level 70, and I would recommend you don't switch to Cast on Crit before level 70, because Merc Lab is kind of important. This is around the time you'll have Merc Lab. So the labs are Tailwind first, then Ricochet, and then Endless Munitions, and Focal Point for your Lab. Once you get Endless Munitions, Tornado Shot doesn't require any extra projectiles, and it'll feel pretty good at this point. So it's a good time to switch that for Cast on Crit. Kind of how your tree's going to look. We eventually use Cluster Jewels. Early on, you can probably use Crit Cluster Jewels. We're currently using Streamline Repeater on both of them. This is good for projectile damage and projectile speed. And we're also using Arcane Heroism on our large cluster, along with some ES Leech. I'm not going to talk about the tree as much as I normally do, because this is more of an endgame tree and not a leveling tree. So I'm just going to go over like the important parts, and I'm not going to go point by point like I normally do. This is kind of how your tree looks at level 70, and this is how it's going to look endgame. So the key things to note here are we're using Glorious Vanity. Glorious Vanity is pretty good defensively. I would say in softcore, it's not necessary. You can probably go more for a more damage option. Not that it's really required, as you'll see in the footage. The character already does insane damage. This is pretty good defensively. In order to make Glorious Vanity not kill us and to recover the ES, we run Soul Thief. Soul Thief is ES on kill, so for while you're mapping, you're always going to be full ES basically. And we also have the ES Leech like I talked about before. And we're running ES on hit with attack jewel. It's only +3, but it does add up to a little bit. And then on top of that, we're using Ghost Shrouds. So we have quite a bit of evasion, and we're running Grace / Jade Flask. So Ghost Dance pretty much almost recovers all of our ES. Not quite, but it's pretty good. Now you might have noticed that from the end game tree to the early game tree, the pathing is quite a bit different. This is because of leadership's price. So for leadership's price, you actually need to make sure your highest tier attributes are equal. And in this case, it's going to be dexterity and intellect. So we path through this way to get more dexterity, or sorry, more int. This is pretty much just the price of using leadership. It's not too complicated to work around, but it does require a bit of fiddling with your gear. Probably the most annoying part about the character. Speaking of leadership, you can level this character without having one in SSF and just farm for it eventually. The only difference is you'll have to run crit clusters and get power charges and use an 8 base bow instead of a thicket bow. So you see more crit, and you'll probably also have to run crit strike shim as well. So leadership makes it so you don't need any of that, but if you do want to level without it, it's definitely doable. The other thing I want to talk about is strength. So anytime you're playing a right side build and you're using determination, you're going to need quite a bit of strength. And in this case, we're using some strength nodes. Ideally, you just have strength in the gear, and I eventually solved this with the strength belt. But early on, especially, you'll probably need strength. I'd say the most important nodes to get are all the stuff here. So for example, like level 88, your tree would probably look something like this. So Glorious Vanity is more of an endgame thing. And that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about with the tree. Let me know if you guys want me to talk more about the tree next time, but I feel like this is more of an endgame tree, endgame build, so I didn't want to talk about the tree too much. But yes, I'll link both of these in the description, and yeah, just let me know. Any feedback is appreciated. Now for the gems. So I quickly want to talk about some of the gems and like the important things to note here. We're going to go over the main links first. So we're using Blazing Salvo cast on crit with Blast Rain or Tornado Shot. So Blast Rain for single target. One thing to note is the alt quality gems are actually quite important for this. Well, maybe not important, but they're very impactful. So for Blast Rain, Anomalous Blast Rain gives you cover enemies in Ash, which is another 20% damage taken increase for this character. Pretty huge. This is very big for single target. For Tornado Shot, it gives you attack speed. So Tornado Shot, alt quality is attack speed. Like I said before, attack speed is really good for this character. You can never really have enough attack speed for Tornado Shot. It's just good. It's not required, it's just good. And Inspiration. So there's another good alt quality for Inspiration. Normally, it doesn't really do anything, but Anomalous gives you crit strike chance, so that's pretty good. And then we're using Empower with our bow, so we're getting additional like couple levels from the bow. It's +5 levels. Our salvo is 27. 27 with level 3 Empower. So if you had Awakened, it'd be 29. Pretty good. I quickly want to talk about the CDR breakpoints and how that affects cast on crit. So like I said before, there is 3 breakpoints. There's 0%, 14%, and 52%. Now, normally you cannot hit 52% unless you're using Awaken cast on crit, and that's the case here. What's interesting about this, though, is we have +3 bow, and we have +3 from crit strike shim. So we have a level 11 Awaken cast on crit. Now this is really cool because every level of Awaken cast and crit gives you 3 CDR. So we're getting 38 CDR from our cast and crit, which is pretty close to the 3rd breakpoint already. Like I said before, we are getting some CDR on belt and boots. So we get 16% on belt and 5% on boots. Now, once you have the level 11 Awaken cast and crit, you can actually drop that down to 10% CDR on belt, which means you can just craft it. And if you want to use like a mage butt, for example, you can actually do that by getting a higher implicit on boots and some CDR jewels. So Abyssal Jewels can actually roll 2% CDR. per jewel. So if you have like 3 of those plus a better boot plus it, you can actually run Mage Blood or Headhunter and still hit the 3rd breakpoint, which is pretty huge. That's all I want to talk about with the gem links here. For the helmet, we are, like I said before, we're using Cold Snap, which gives us chill as well. Still, the chilling area for some reason applies chill and it affects our gloves. And yeah, it's just a good link. Flame Wall affects our projectiles. It gives us more damage. And the burning. Purifying Flame. The only reason we're using Purifying Flame, and I didn't use it for a long time, is because we have Divergent. So Divergent Purifying Flame applies a 5% damage increase taken to enemies. Pretty nice. You can run Power Charge on Crit here. You can run Arcane Surge here. There's a lot of good gem links you can use here. I just went with Purifying Flame because I don't need Crit anymore, and I have Arcane Surge on my cluster. And Sniper's Mark. So this is the main reason I use the helmet. Sniper's Mark is insane on this character. Acid Chant procs it constantly, and Sniper's Mark plus Focal Point is kind of nuts. It's just always up. You're always taking less damage. It's always transferring. It's always splitting projectiles while mapping. It's just very smooth, and it makes the clear really, really good. So I would recommend, that's the main reason I use Acid Chant. I would recommend you put Sniper's Mark in there. One important thing to note is 21 Sniper's Mark gives you an additional split, which in our case would give us an additional 2 projectiles on Blazing Salvo, which is pretty huge. And also using Determination Grace, Defiance Banner, all that good stuff. We're using Life Tap Zealotry and Flame Dash, and I put Wave of Conviction and Arcane Surge here just to emulate it for the POB. You guys want to take a look at that and description. And that's all I kind of want to talk about. Oh, we're also using Tornado. So Tornado actually works with Blazing Salvo. Normally, ground targeted projectiles don't work, but Blazing Salvo has the either enemies or ground. So it can actually work with Tornado. And we're also just using Onslaught and Increased Duration there. And Precision and Vitality. We're using Vitality because it's the Watcher's Eye, so we're just using level 1 Vitality. Now you can eventually use Melting on this character, and I would probably change the auras for that. I would probably end up using like a Purity and like running some Reservation Clusters and whatnot. That's pretty much all I want to talk about the gems, and yeah. This character turned out way better than I ever expected it to be. I originally just had an idea, and I went with it without looking at POB, and this is the result. I would say the only downside for this character is no second movement skill, and that's only because it's a bow character. It really is a shame that Blink Arrow is the only movement skill other than Flame Dash you can use with a bow character, and Blink Arrow is just not very good, unfortunately. I would recommend for softcore probably getting a little more movement speed on the tree and movement speed on gear, just to make up for that. But other than that, this character is insane. Like, it just maps really well, it does bosses really well, it can probably do some lacking really well. It's just good at pretty much everything, except I would say the one downside is, like I said, the movement skill thing. And it has no regen, so you have to be attacking to recover. I mean, it has a little bit of regen, but not significant amount, right? And you're also not using a shield, so you do have access to less fish reduction, but it's fine. It has a lot of armor and it has fish reduction. It's not like a huge deal. I would just say you're not going to be taking Uber Shaper Slam anytime soon. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the character. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I enjoyed making it, and I enjoyed making the character. If you guys have any feedback, just let me know in the comments below. I appreciate any feedback. I'm still pretty new to this. And yeah, if you guys liked the video, just make sure you like and subscribe. And GG, guys. I hope you guys enjoy it. See ya.